I call the meeting of the Environment and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee to order. A quorum is present. Representative Purcell, would you like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes, Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes from April 9th, 2024.
Representative Purcell moves the minutes for April 9th, 2024. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The minutes are approved. Members, today we are going to do a walkthrough of the Environment and Natural Resources Supplemental Finance and Policy Bill, House File 3911. We will be walking through the spreadsheets and take public testimony, but no action will be taken. The deadline to submit amendments to the DE1 need to be sent to our committee administrator, Mr. Peter Strohmeyer. So the deadline is 7 p.m. Tuesday, April 16th, 2024, and amendments will be posted shortly after. Tomorrow, we will continue to take member questions, mark up the bill, and then vote on it. And so, Representative Hansen, would you like to present the DE1 amendment to House File 3911?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. House File 3911, if you remember, started out with an extension and trying to make sure that an appropriation from last year's significant environmental investment bill to the University of Minnesota for the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Research Center, if we could get that actually to the University of Minnesota. The DE1 is a comprehensive budget bill that we have put together as a DE, and I think it's important to note that this is a supplemental budget year. It's a supplemental bill. The governor's provided a supplemental budget request. We are doing a supplemental budget bill. That means that it takes into account what we did last year and where we provided investments, and it provides balance and rebalancing of some of the investments that we did. You're going to see some extensions in here. You're going to see some further clarifications, and you're going to see new investments or additional investments in some of the appropriations that we heard last year, as well as the bills that we've been hearing throughout this session. So with that, I have our nonpartisan staff are going to do a walkthrough of the bill.
Yep. First, I believe Mr. Brad Hagemeyer will be walking through the spreadsheet. Mr. Hagemeyer.
Madam Chair, I will start with the spreadsheet. Top says Minnesota House of Representatives, House Fiscal Analysis Department, HF 3911DE1. I think there's a general fund one-page one as well, but I'm going through the one that's 2 pages stapled together that has all the funds on it. On the left-hand side, you'll see the change items and then the fund that it's coming from, whether it's a direct appropriation, statutory, revenue, that type of thing. The first 2 sets of 3 columns are the governor's recommendations. Then the last 2 sets of 3 columns are what's contained in the DE1. Starting on line 4, you'll see the governor had climate pollution reduction grants of $5 million from the general fund. That was not included in this bill, but there's a carve out of last year's climate resiliency grants, which were approximately $100 million. This allows $5 million of that to be used to leverage federal funds. On line 6, you'll see the legal costs that were the governor's recommendation for $5.5 million from the general fund. On line 7 and I'll start with line 7, there's an extension for the French Lake Water Quality Grant that was appropriated last year. I think it's $75,000. This allows that to be given another year. And I should note those are contained in section 7 of Article 1. The intent was for those to be June 30th of 2025, giving them 1-year extension and maintaining the current biennium. They're unintentionally listed as June 30th, 2026, which would put them outside the biennium, which is problematic for the budget rules. So the intent is for those to be June 30th, 2025 for the extensions. On line 8, you'll see the rulemaking for EIS for large animal projects required, which is House File 4698 of Representative Purcell's. There's a $9,000 agency absorbed cost for that. That bill is included in here. On line, that's it for the general fund for the Pollution Control Agency. On line 10, the legal capacity that was a recommendation of the governor is included at $525 per year. Line 11 is the increased capacity to protect air quality and environmental justice areas. It's $2.9 million the first year and $2.6 million per year thereafter. And that is recovered through increased air quality fees. You'll see lower on the page as a revenue. On line 12 is response monitoring, which was another recommendation from the governor. It's 1.2 or 1 million the first year and 535,000 each year thereafter. On line 13 is the mercury-containing lighting ban. There is $88,000 per year of absorbed environmental fund cost. So when I say absorbed, it has no new appropriation for it. The agency absorbs it within their current budget. Line 14 is the post-closure care solid waste disposal facilities. It's House File 3416 of Representative Bierman's. That has $16,000 of absorbed cost. On line 15 is the environmental and civil penalty provisions modified of Representative Lee's, and that is $20,000 per year of absorbed costs. On line 16 is a report on the state agency salt purchases of Representative Hansen, and then similar to that, there's a report on state agency nitrogen fertilizer purchases. Both of those cost $88,000 per year from the environmental fund. On line 18 is PFAS and biosolid agricultural fertilizer report. There's $350,000 one-time appropriation for that. Line 19 is the end-of-life products task force, also commonly called the critical minerals recovery of Representative Kozlowski, is $319,000. And then on line 20 is the physical measurements of air emissions and reporting. I think it's Representative Lee's bill, and this has a $2 million one-time appropriation for that. And that's it for the environmental fund. On line 22, you'll see the boat product stewardship program of Representative Crafts of $219,000 the first year. It's a little bit $363 the second year, and then $219 thereafter, and that is offset with revenue as well. And then on line 23, you'll see the Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act of Representative Jordan's. It's $1.8 million the first year and $1.5 the second year, $1.2 in 27. Again, that is also offset by revenues on lines 28. So going, that's it for the new appropriations. The revenues that I just mentioned are line 26, 27, and 28, offsetting a couple of those programs. In total, there's $5.5 million of new general fund money for the Pollution Control Agency, and then there's $7.3 million direct appropriations from other funds, the environmental fund in this case. Going down to line 39 is the start of the Department of Natural Resources. The first two change items are governor's recommendations. It was $1.3 million one time from general fund for legal costs and $200,000 for law enforcement response costs. On line 44, there's the use of critical habitats private sector matching account modified. There's a report required in there. There's a $7,000 one-time general fund appropriation for that report. On line 45, the water quality monitoring in state fish hatcheries. This is no new money for it, but it's $366,000 carve out of the appropriations that were made last year for fish hatchery improvements in the Get Outdoor More Act. On line 46, there's the general C.C. Andrews State Nursery reopening report. There's $200,000 one-time appropriation for the agency to provide a report back to the legislature on what's all necessary for that nursery to be reopened. On line 47 and 48, there's two grant extensions for Dakota County Boat Access and the Swing Bridge. These are appropriations that were made last year, and again, the intent is for these to be June 30th, 2025. And on line 49 is another grant extension. This one is to the U of M. This one's two pieces. There's a general fund piece, which should be June 30th, 2025, and then there's a heritage enhancement account piece, which was given a little bit longer. Flipping to the next page, you'll see the next set of changes starting on line 51 is the ELS system. This was the governor's recommendation, and it goes 51 through 57. These are the various accounts that the appropriation comes out of, and it just is the same as the governor had recommended for this. On line 59 is the operating adjustment for law enforcement services. And again, this was the governor's recommendation, and you can see it's out of the water rec account, the ATV account, and the game and fish operations account. I would note that I made an error in the tracking sheet. In fiscal years 26 and 7, the ATV account should be $54,000 per year instead of $101,000. And I'll update that on the next version of the spreadsheet. On line 64 is water quality monitoring at state fish hatcheries. The other piece was a carve out of money to install the water quality monitoring equipment. This would be a $30,000 per year out of the game and fish operations account for the tests that are actually needed. Line 65 is tree planting in state parks out of the lottery in lieu account, the state parks lottery in lieu account of $4 million one time. On line 66 is community tree planting grants out of the Heritage Enhancement account of $3.4 million one time. And then there's carve-outs in there, a grant to St. Peter for $300,000 and a grant to Northfield for $300,000. On line 69 is the release of domestic hogs prohibited and fur farm modifications. This is coming out of the Heritage Enhancement account again at $700,000 the first year and then $550 per year thereafter. And line 70 is the other piece of the MASERC grant extension from the Heritage Enhancement account that I just mentioned. Going down to line 72 is the ATV account. So the ATV grant and aid program of Representative Liz Lagarde bill. This is $1.5 million the first year and $200,000 per year thereafter, increase to the base. Line 73 is the Prospector Loop ATV trail system at $1.2 million. And line 74 is listed as ATV trail changes signage, which should be OHV trails changes signage. It's out of the ORV account for $100,000 for new signage for the requirements. Line 75 is South St. Paul Aquatic Center grant for $400,000, and it's out of the Underserved Communities Lottery and Lieu account. That's a new account that was created last year. Line 76 is the zoo's lottery and lieu account, and it's a grant to provide climate-adapted tree species at the two zoos. This would be for the Como and Duluth Zoo. You'll later on see the Minnesota Zoo. Line 77 is recreational uses of school trust lands report. This is a Representative Newton bill. It's out of the permanent school fund for $417,000 one time. On line 79 is planting corn on state lands prohibited of Representative Hansen. This is out of the RIM account to transfer those lands over to other species other than crops or other than corn. On line 80 is the first of four pieces you'll see for the use of critical habitats private sector matching account modified. This is that report that I mentioned earlier, but this, the language takes some of the money from that's currently going to DNR in the critical habitat account and now puts it into the dedicated account that gets transferred over to Bowser. So the lost spending potential for DNR is 484 that now gets transferred to Bowser. Line 82 is the governor's recommendation for license simplification, the elimination of the goose permit. This is the lost or reduced cost the agency has for administering that. In line 83, there's a provision in here for the fur farm that I mentioned previously. There's some revenue associated with that. So this is a statutory appropriation of that or revenue out of a new account. And then down below, you'll also see the revenue for that. It's just $8,000 per year. Starting on line 85 are the revenues. Getting rid of eliminating the goose permit loses $102,000 per year. The lands bill, which was passed on the House floor yesterday as a separate bill, has positive revenue of $312 the first year, but I'm just tracking on here for now. Line 88, the governor had a minerals related rules update that did not have a cost, but it was included in the budget bill. That is not included in this bill. And then the next four you'll see are lost revenue to various accounts, the general fund, the special revenue fund, the game and fish fund, and the permanent school fund for the restriction on planting corn on state lands. And then you'll see on line 93 is the $8,000 of revenue from the new fur farm account. And then 94 is that transfer out of the current RIM account to Bowser for the critical habitat money. In total, there's $1.7 million of new money to new general fund money to DNR, and just under $15 million of non-general fund money being appropriated. Going to, sorry.
We'll proceed.
Okay. On the next page, line 108 is the Board of Water and Soil Resources. On line 111, there's $1.337 million for the lawn legumes program. Line 112 is the subsurface drain tile disclosure and additional drainage work. This has a direct appropriation of $286 the first year, $325 per year thereafter out of the general fund, and there's also revenue associated with this to the general fund. Line 114, you'll see the new account that I just mentioned for the critical habitat money that was transferred to Bowser of $484 per year. And then going on line 117, you'll see the revenue going to the general fund from the subsurface drain tile disclosure bill. It's the same. It's $286 the first year and $381 each year thereafter. And then you'll see the revenue of the transfer in from the RIM account. Going to line 131 is the Met Council Parks. Line 134, there's $8 million for community tree planting grants. And there's a carve out in there of $600,000 for a grant to South St. Paul. Line 136, there's the Lions Levy Park pedestrian bridge for $400,000 from the general fund one time. And then non-general fund items on 138, there's community tree grants of $3.4 million. So in total, the Met Council has 8.4 million of general fund and 3.4 million of non-general fund change items. And I think the last change is the top line on the last page. It's line 147. This is the corresponding money for the Minnesota Zoo for the climate adapted tree species. In total, this bill appropriates 17.23 million of new general fund money, and that's offset by $230,000 of net revenue to get to the $17 million target. There's 25.8 million of non-general fund direct appropriations, and then you can just see the other calculations on the bottom, and that's all I have on the spreadsheet, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hagemeyer. Next, we will go to Janelle Taylor to walk through some of the language. Ms. Taylor.
Madam Chair and members, I'm going to start on page 8, which is the start of the statutory and other language, Article 2. And this pertains to the Pollution Control Agency. Sections 1 and 2 are alternative language to the Chair's House File 3368 that pertain to the Cliff and Melcat accounts. This would require money to be paid back if it's used for purposes other than the statutory purposes of those accounts with any forecasted general fund surplus. Section 3 is a combination of section from House File 4410, which was the PCA enforcement bill, and House File 3731, which was the waste heat bill. This is as the committee last saw it, except there are changes on page 14, lines 13 through 14. There had been a reference to federal law. It has been removed at the request of the PCA. Section 4 is another section from the PCA enforcement bill. This is as it was, no changes. Section 5 is another provision from the PCA enforcement bill, as well as a provision from Representative Lee's House File 671, which had the enhanced penalties. This is as the committee last saw it, except for the immediate effective dates have been removed. Sections 6 through 8, starting on the bottom of page 15, are all from the PCA's enforcement bill. These are all as they were, no changes. Section 9 on page 16 is some alternative language to House File 4932, Representative Hornstein's food waste bill. If you go to page 17, there's new paragraphs C and D. C would establish a hierarchy of preferred waste management practices to achieve goals, and then paragraph D provides some definitions. Moving to page 18, section 10 would establish a definition of finished sewage sludge product. This is in relation to the PF, the biosolid testing for PFAS bill that we heard that section 14 from House File 4135. Section 11 is House File 3320, Representative Kraft's Boat Wrap Product Stewardship Program. This is language as it's in its current form with no changes. We can skip ahead to page 24, section 12. This is a provision from House File 3417, Representative Jordan's bill dealing with waste composition studies. It has been modified based on some PCA feedback. The study would be required every 3 years rather than every 2 years, and it would begin in 2029. You'll see those changes on line 2421. There's also some new language on page 25. There's new paragraph C and D, starting on line 17. Paragraph C requires certain facilities to use the study requirements, and then paragraph D would require PCA to obtain input from certain folks before they finalize sampling methods and requirements. Moving to page 26, section 13 is another section from the waste composition study bill. There's no changes here. Section 14 is another section from the Cliff Melcat bill. This is modified. Originally, there was local approval in order to use the money for purposes other than statutory purposes. This would require notification only. Sections 15 through 17 are from the PCA's enforcement bill. There's no changes here. Section 18 is some modified language from Representative Lee's House File 3579 dealing with air pollution. This section would require the PCA to develop a list of 30 facilities that pose the greatest risk to the environment and human health, and then to develop protocols for those facilities to test more frequently for the emissions. And then it also establishes some additional testing and reporting requirements. Moving to page 32, section 19, and section 20 as well. These are both from House File 671 on the enhanced penalties. The only difference here is there's the immediate effective date has been removed. Section 21 on the bottom of page 33 is from the PCA enforcement bill. There's no changes here. Section 22 is from the chair's bill requiring the state salt purchase report. No changes here, as well as section 23 requiring a similar report for the nitrogen fertilizer purchases. No changes here. Section 24 is from the second engrossment of House File 3326. This is the bill banning certain mercury-containing lamps. There are no changes here. Moving to page 38, section 25. This is another section of the waste heat bill. There have been some additional changes based on recommendations from the PCA. If you go to line 39.9, there was a reference to virgin resources that has been removed, and then on 39.19, there was a reference to federal law that has also been removed. Section 26 is another section related to the Melcat bill. This is requiring the local notification, and this is for the Melcat account. Section 27 on the bottom of that page is a modified version of that section that dealt with testing for biosolids. This is a compromise worked out with the PCA. Section 28 on page 40 is from House File 4550. This is the Critical Materials Recovery Advisory Task Force. There were a few changes made here on 41.3, new paragraph C would prohibit lobbyists from serving on the task force. And then on the bottom of page 41, 41.30 and 41.31 is new language requiring the port to have more actionable recommendations. On page 42, section 29 is from the PCA Policy Bill 3416, no changes here. Section 30 is from Representative Purcell's House File 4698, requiring EISs for large livestock projects, no changes here. And then 31 is a repealer from the Waste Comp study, and there's no changes here. Then continuing on to Article 3, this is the Natural Resources article. The first section is from House File 3461, dealing with DNR's Forest Industry Data Survey, or the survey data. No changes there. Sections 2 and 3 are from the DNR Policy Bill. No changes here. Section 4 is another section for the data on forest industry survey data. There's no changes here. Section 5 is another DNR policy section, no changes. Section 6 is from Representative Lee's House File 3738, establishing the Community Tree Planting Grant Program, no changes here. Sections 7 through 9 are from Representative Purcell's House File 2791. There were some changes here. It's been modified, so the only provisions that have been included are those that require operation on mapped and signed trails. And there's also been an extension of when it would apply. It's been delayed 2 years till August 1st, 2026. Going to page 47, section 10. This is a modified version of some language that was amended onto the DNR policy bill regarding snowmobile mufflers. If you go to the top of page 48, you'll see that it's been narrowed to, the certification requirements have been narrowed to apply only to aftermarket mufflers. And then there were some other technical changes made to the penalties based on DNR feedback. Sections 11 and 12 are from House File 3617, the critical habitat license plate revenues, and there's no changes here. On page 50, section 13 is from the chair's corn planting on state lands prohibition. This is as it was. And then section 14 is from the DNR policy bill related to the Minnesota Relief Program. There is some new language. There's a new paragraph B establishing some priority for awarding grants under the program. On the bottom of page 50, you'll see sections 15 and then 15 through actually sections 24. They're all from DNR policy bills without change, except for there's one change on section 17 on page 51. The extension of the Mineral Coordinating Committee was reduced from 10 years to 5 years, so it would expire on 2031 instead of 2036. And then we can skip ahead to page 53. Section 25 and 26 eliminate the special goose license fees for the governor's budget. And then on page 56, section 27, this is another provision from the DNR Game and Fish Policy Bill, no changes here. Section 28 is from House File 1788 regarding the authorization of selling fat tissue. There's no changes here. Section 29 is a modified version of Representative Fisher's House File 945. There have been some changes. There was reference to public waters, having that apply there. That has been removed. The definition of private property has also been narrowed, and there's some additional exemptions, including parcels that are more than 40 acres used primarily for timber production and for private property located north of Highway 2. Sections 30 through 33 are from the DNR policy bills, no changes there. On the bottom of page 59, you'll see section 34 and then also section 35. These are from the DNR policy bills related to public meetings for certain water designations. These have been changed. Originally, it was proposed to remove a requirement that there be a meeting in the metro if certain conditions were met. This has reinstated that language, but said that the meetings only have to apply if there's, or be held if there's, unless there's a virtual meeting or, and that meeting is noticed. And you'll see that language on lines 60.31 through 60.33, and then again for on lines 61.17 through 61.19. Moving to page 62, section 36 is a modified version of House File 4214, requiring monitoring of state fish hatcheries. This has been changed so that the testing would be for source water, it would be monthly, and then it would only apply to certain hatcheries. Sections 37 and 38 are from the DNR policy bill, no changes. Section 39 is from Representative Ving's House File 3596 that clarified DNR rulemaking authority, no changes there. House File, or Section 40 is from House File 3385. This is the provision clarifying the definition of public waters, no changes here. 41 is, Section 41 is another section from the DNR policy bill, no changes. And then Section 42 is another section for the clarifying the DNR's rulemaking authority, no changes there. Section 43 is another section from the chair's ban on corn plots. This is the transition language, no change there. Section 44 is from Representative Newton's bill requiring the report on recreational use of school trust lands. If you remember, there was an oral amendment posed but not adopted. That has been incorporated here on lines 22 through 24. And then there's some additional time for the report on line 67.18. So it's till January 15th, 2026. Section 45 on page 67 is a modified version from the OHV bill. This is just modified to conform to the reduced scope of the changes being made. Section 46 is a provision similar to a provision we had in the House bill last year. This would require DNR to hold a license plate design contest to design a new state park license plate. Then on the bottom of 67, continuing on to 68, are the repealers. Paragraphs A through C are all from the OHV bill, and you'll see that those would become effective August 1st, and it should be 2026 to line up with that. That'll be included in a technical bill, and then, or a technical amendment. And then paragraph D includes some additional repealers. 84.03 subdivision 3 is the repeal of the requirement to get county approval for purchasing SNAs, and then 97B.802 would be repealed, and this is the special Canada Goose license. Then we move on to Article 4, which is the Board of Water and Soil Resources. Sections 1 through 3 are from House File 3874. This is the bill with the buffer APO authority modifications and the lawns to legumes data changes. There are no changes to these provisions. Section 4 on page 70, this is a new section requiring certain commitments from applicants for soil health equipment assistance grants. Section 5 is another section from the Buffer APO Authority bill. This is as it was. And then Section 6 is from Representative Purcell's bill on the drain tile cellar disclosure requirements. This is the second engrossment, and there were no changes here. Then on the bottom of page 73, Section 7, this would require Bowser to submit a report to the legislature on the expenditure of certain soil health appropriations passed last year. And then if we go to page 74, this is the start of Article 5, and it is entirely the House File 3577, Representative Jordan's bill, establishing the Packaging Waste and Cost Reduction Act. This is the fourth engrossment with only one change, and that's on page 83. It's just a technical change on lines 8 and 9 that would appropriate the fees collected to the commissioner. So then we can skip ahead to page 113. And that's the Article 6. This is all from the chair's Barrel Swine and Fur Farm Bill, House File 4844. There were a few changes here. Paragraph E, starting on line 14, the definition of a release has been changed. You'll see persistent has been added so that the accidental escapes would need to be persistent. And then on line 16 and 17, the release would not include an accidental escape due to a transportation accident or an act of God. There's also a change on the bottom of the page on line 28. The Board of Animal Health has been inserted instead of the Commissioner of Ag, so they would be responsible for the confinement standards. And then there had been some language requiring the Commissioner to establish confinement standards, and that has been removed. And we can skip ahead to page 120. You'll see there's one other change that was inadvertent. The repealer is missing, and that will be added to the author's technical amendment. It had repealed the the voluntary farm for registrations. Then Article 7 is a miscellaneous article. The first section would define pesticide-treated seed for purposes of Chapter 18B. Section 2 would prohibit neonic pesticides registrations for use as a soybean seed treatment unless certain conditions were met. Section 3 would define nitrogen inhibitor for purposes of Chapter 18C. Section 4 would define systemic pesticide for purposes of the Minnesota Seed Law. Section 5, if you turn to the top of page 122, would prohibit the sale of like non-agricultural seed treated with neonics. Section 6 would modify some definitions for purposes of the sustainable aviation fuel tax credits. There'll be a new definition for qualified clean hydrogen is added, and then the definition of sustainable aviation fuel has been modified. Section 7 on page 123 would establish some requirements of businesses applying for the sustainable aviation fuel credit when using biomass. Section 8 on page 124 and also Section 9 are sections that would prohibit a member of the LCCMR from voting on certain land acquisitions if they have a conflict of interest, and then reduce the supermajority requirement accordingly. This is similar to what was done for their overall recommendations last session. And then the final section, Section 10, establishes a community tree planting grant program similar to the one for DNR, but this would be administered by Met Council. And that concludes that.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Next, we will proceed to public testimony. There will be a strict time limit that will be enforced for 3 minutes for all testifiers. When 3 minutes is up, you will hear a slight tap. Please conclude the sentence you are on because we have a lot of testifiers that we need to get through today. First on my list is Commissioner Katrina Kessler from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Following Commissioner Kessler will be John Waters from the Minnesota DNR. Welcome to the committee. Commissioner, please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Jordan, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Katrina Kessler. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House File 3911. Thank you to Chair Hansen, Vice Chair Jordan, Lead Heinzman, and all the members of the committee for all the hard work and the productive conversations that we've had to get to this point. The MPCA has been hard at work over the past 10 months to implement the historic investments and groundbreaking policy that many of you were a part of last session. Even though the available resources are more limited this year, House File 3911 builds on last year's successes and continues to advance our shared work to protect environment and human health. While there are still conversations that need to be had on some specific items, we want to highlight that overall this is a very good bill, and a few things that I'll call out. The legal costs are a big part of the bill this year, and I'm grateful to the committee for showing up for the MPCA when we need the support to defend the decisions that we have to make. I'm grateful to the committee for the funding for the increased capacity for air quality and environmental justice areas and responsive monitoring. These two proposals represent a really important phase in the MPCA's work to decrease disparate impacts in environmental justice communities. And clarity around the agency's enforcement authorities will ensure that we can protect all Minnesotans from the most harmful pollutants. There are also items stemming from committee members and other House members that we're excited to see in the bill. Vice Chair Jordan's Waste Packaging and Cost Reduction Act represents a critical step forward in our efforts to reduce our waste problem. Representative Hemmings and Yeager's bill to phase out mercury-containing products is common sense in a good governance that comes with no real cost to the state. And Chair Hansen, we appreciate you working with us on provisions around PFAS and biosolids, which is also a critical issue that the state needs to keep moving forward on. Again, thank you for all of you for your thoughtful work this far, and we look forward to working with members of the committee through the next stages in the process.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next on my list is John Waters, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, followed by Pierce Bennett from Minnesota Farm Bureau. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Committee members, my name is John Waters. I'm the Government Relations Unit Supervisor for the DNR. And it's similar to Commissioner Kessler. I just came here to thank the committee for all the hard work and for Chair Hansen's work on the Omnibus Environment Bill this year. We've also been working hard to provide good policy, and we appreciate the inclusion of several of the governor's supplemental budget recommendations and most of the DNR's policy provisions. We do have some concerns on the policy provisions included in this bill, and we look forward to working with Chair Hansen and the committee to address those concerns as the bill moves forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on my list is Pierce Bennett, followed by Tim Spreck from the Minnesota Trappers Association. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Pierce Bennett, Director of Public Policy from Minnesota Farm Bureau, and I have the opportunity to represent over 30,000 farm and ranch families across the state. Come here to testify this afternoon to share a couple concerns in the bill that we in the agriculture community want to raise, and there are several of them. So I would also reference some of the testimony that will follow me, as well as written testimony that was provided by multiple of our agriculture industry partners, and would encourage the committee to examine those. But to keep it concise, we share concerns about some of the language concerning corn on public lands, concerning the ability to plant it, utilize it within wildlife programming, but also for commercial use. We also share concerns surrounding language on use of treated seeds and neonicotinoids and what that means to allow options. Specifically in this language, we see it references soybean, but just more generally, we need those tools in agriculture. The more tools we have, the more options our farmers have to farm sustainably and efficiently, and we believe that's important. I would direct your attention to two pieces of the bill that I'd like to highlight the most. First and foremost would be language around the drain tile seller's disclosure requirement. It is strongly communicated through our policy book on behalf of our 30,000 members that we believe there is a strong regulatory framework already in existence for drainage and for drainage tile projects. We do not believe we need additional regulatory frameworks and additional disclosure requirements here, and would encourage you all to consider that as you're deliberating this bill. And finally, I would mention language surrounding a mandatory environmental impact statement, or EIS, for livestock operations of 10,000 animal units or more. We are opposed to that idea. We do believe that this will create a precedent for deciding what size farms should or shouldn't be. We do not believe this is necessary, and remind the committee that the MPCA currently has the discretion to be able to determine if an EIS is necessary based off of the EAW, a document that comes prior to it and is required for the appropriate sized farms. So would encourage you all to consider these as you go forward in your deliberations, and thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. Next on my list is Tim Spreck from the Minnesota Trappers Association, followed by Tony Quillis. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. My name is Tim Spreck. I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota Trappers Association. I'm going to limit my remarks today to a couple items in Article 3. We're not taking a position on the rest of the bill this afternoon. Line 46, the OHV access piece, we've discussed this before. I just want to reiterate. Current bill will limit use of state and forest land north of Highway 2. The access to these lands is important for fur harvest and possibly also nuisance beaver control. Most trapping is done in the wintertime when the ground is frozen, so we're not responsible for damage to trails or any of the lands up north. So, and then on line 47.8, there is an exception by permit. This is kind of intriguing, but we would like to know more and maybe have some additional comfort language here. The question is, would this pertain to trappers doing their work? Needs to be clarified, and we'd also like to determine what our position is within this exemption. Line 57.3 on permission to trap. Recreational use of lands has always been open to any form of outdoor recreation. This specifically is discriminatory against trapping, which is highly concerning for the people that I represent. Additionally, on this section, it's extremely difficult to tell if a property is seasonal or occupied at all. Oftentimes, it's impossible to find the landowner to ask permission. Impossible to tell if a property is 10 acres or less, and also additionally impossible to tell if a property is 40 acres or more. Unknown property boundaries can cause a trapper who is trying to be lawful to be in violation. Violations are presumably a misdemeanor, which can carry a $1,000 fine and also jail time if convicted. So this is something we're very concerned about. Through no fault of their own, the trapper could be in violation when they think that they're obeying the conditions of this particular provision. We appreciate the exemption on line 57.11 and 57.15 for nuisance animal control, but there may still be no access based on the OHV issues that we discussed earlier. In conclusion, trapping has not been a problem in the past in these areas. Most trapping takes place in winter when the ground is frozen. 3911 is discriminating specifically against trappers as outdoor recreators, and it's impossible to understand the language and extremely challenging to comply with the law. This causes law-abiding citizens to potentially be in violation through no fault of their own. This provision would need extensive work if it was something that was going to actually be workable in the real world. So we position ourselves in the ready to be able to be discussing this when anyone may want to contact us. So appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Tony Quillis from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, followed by Joe Smentek. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Tony Quillis, and I'm the Director of Environmental Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you for the opportunity to make a couple of brief comments today on House File 3911. Madam Chair and members, just a couple of points that I wanted to make. And first of all, starting in Article 5 that deals with extended producer responsibility in EPR. In previous testimony, I talked about Minnesota already leads the nation, is one of the leaders in the nation of recycling rates We have a solid waste tax in place that already raises over $120 million a year. We have millions of dollars in public and private investment. So the system is there and it's adequate and well-funded. Additionally, last year, this legislature appropriated $680,000 to the Pollution Control Agency to come back with a report of June of 2025 to try and reduce 90% by 2045 our solid waste here in the state. So I think we should take a pause before we start to go through and implement a whole new program here in Minnesota. Second one of concerns deals with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency enforcement provisions that are contained in the bill. There are very broad and undefined terms that increase the ability of the agency to go through and issue cease and desist orders throughout the state of Minnesota. We think they already have this authority in their emergency powers section, and we have yet to see a case where they have not been able to use this authority. But the big concern about the enforcement provisions in there is the private right of actions that allow individuals to sue businesses or the state of Minnesota that is contained in there. And we'd like to work with the agency to try and address some of these concerns, and we've had some preliminary conversations with them to try and tighten up those terms of the provisions contained in there. And then finally, Madam Chair and members, the final concern is Section 18 that deals with air emission protocols. Last year, this legislature gave extensive expansion to the agency to regulate air emissions here in Minnesota, and they are undergoing rulemaking right now doing that. Additionally, the Chamber Foundation came out with a report that compared us to 9 other states and looked at other regulatory issues for the agency. The agency does do some things very well, but one of the things that we're behind 6 times slower than other states is air permitting. And we think this Section 18 will increase time, cost, and uncertainty and cost us economic development projects here in the state as we try and grow our economy. Madam Chair, members, thank you for the ability to make some comments on House File 3911.
Thank you for your testimony. And before we go to testimony from Mr. Smentek, I believe Chair Hansen, you had a quick comment you wanted to make regarding a proposed amendment that
Yes,
intended
so
to offer.
as we're going forward, I will have an author's amendment tomorrow. And one of the portions of that on page 120, section 2 under Article 7, 120.19 to 120.25 will be deleted. I also am working with the soybean growers on clarifying another provision in the bill where I think we can find common ground. So I want to do that because Mr. Smentek said he would reduce his testimony if I clarified that on the record before he came up.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Mr. Smentek, please say your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Joe Smentek. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. And I definitely want to thank the author, Chair Hansen, for the discussion we had earlier today and his comments that he just made. That was a provision that was very troubling to us, and I was glad to work on that with him and look forward to working on some of the other provisions. One of the other highlights, or one of the other issues I wanted to highlight, I had testified previously on the definition of public waters and the changes that are to that in this bill. Our farmers like the public water inventory. They like the map. They like the regulatory certainty it gives. This language does not change that. It does not fix the map. It does not add any waters to that map. It will still lead to problems like we saw with Limbo Creek, where we had a county that was not aware that it should have been on a public water because it was not on a public water inventory map. Therefore, it led to a lot of expensive litigation, and the county found out through the litigation that it should have been on the map. We'd really like to see a process where these maps are fixed so our farmers have regulatory certainty. Minnesota corn, Minnesota soy both expressed concerns over these provisions and really would just, like I said again, to have those maps changed so we can get that regulatory certainty and not be subject to lawsuits and finding out some of the things that we're doing, some of the practices are actually on a public water where we did not have the ability to know that, where the map would give us that certainty. And thank you again to the author and Chair Hansen for his work on those other provisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list of testimony is Rick Horton, Minnesota Forest Industries, who will be followed by Kyle Macarios. Welcome to the committee. When you're settled, please state your name for the record and proceed.
Madam Chair and committee members, my name is Rick Horton. I'm the Executive Vice President of Minnesota Forest Industries. MFI is opposed to Article 5, the EPR section of House File 3911 as it pertains to paper products. I've testified before about the high level of recycling that we have in the paper industry. I won't go into that anymore, but just point out that in your packet there's a diagram that shows the high level of integration within this industry and how disruptive any changes to one particular element of it can be to other portions of the industry. This will add to the factors that reduce the competitiveness of Minnesota in the global forest products industry. We already have very high industrial energy rates in the state of Minnesota. We have high corporate taxation. We have low forest productivity because of our, winters and our climate up here. We have high transportation costs, and we haul our raw and finished products long distances to get them to markets. We have an aging rural workforce. And this is just one more thing. In my time in Minnesota in 25 years, I've watched a lot of mills close for various reasons. I think you can think of a lot of them yourselves. And every time we do that, we reduce our ability to manage our forests for a lot of the other things we want: carbon sequestration, climate resilience, for wildlife habitat, for clean water, and all the other recreational benefits we have in our forests. So this has a real chance to jeopardize our existing mills and also constrain future investment in the state of Minnesota, as these decisions are made far from the state on whether or not to make investments here. So we would prefer the paper be completely exempt from the EPR legislation. If that's not possible, we would prefer an off-ramp system that allows us to prove that we already have these high recycling rates and then allow us to be exempted from it. It is good policy to reward those who perform well and target the attention upon those that are not doing well. Additionally, we oppose the portion of this bill that defines the type of biomass that can be used in sustainable aviation fuel. We can more rapidly reduce carbon emissions in the transportation sector by using wood as a feedstock than we can with agricultural products. Right now with wood, we can make SAF with a carbon intensity of 8. Use egg products and it's 58. That's a huge difference, and it will really allow us to decarbonize the aviation sector, the transportation. And doing so will also make for a healthier forest, cleaner environment, more climate change resilient forest, more fire resistant forest, and better wildlife habitat, all a myriad of different things that we get by actively managing our forests. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Kyle Macarios, Minnesota State Building and Construction Trades Council, followed by Amber Backus. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Macarios, and I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota Building Trades Council. Building Trades has several significant concerns with provisions in this bill, and for the sake of time, I'm going to cut right to them. Before I do that, though, I do want to thank the chairman for including the critical minerals task force provisions in this. We think that is a great step toward a fully circular economy when it comes to our state's critical minerals. But as I mentioned, there are a number of provisions in this bill we feel are too heavy-handed against the industry partners who our members rely on for our livelihoods. First, we have concerns over the MPCA Enforcement Authority language in Article 2, Sections 5 and 6. While we think much of this language is workable and appreciate the agency's willingness to engage on these, we believe that accommodations should be made to give companies certainty that this increased authority will only be used in extraordinary circumstances. And we are firmly opposed to the language in Section 6, Subdivision 4, that allows any person to file an enforcement lawsuit to shut a facility down. A private right of action does not make sense in this context, where enforcement requires expertise and knowledge of a complex regulatory scheme. That language that we object to is on line 15.31 of the amendment. Finally, Madam Chair, we're concerned about the provisions in Section 18 of Article 2 dealing with air pollution facilities. This section would add significant cost, paperwork, and burden for some of the businesses who employ the most building trades members in the state and are some of the best places for our members to work. As the chair mentioned in his opening, and as this committee is well aware, we did a lot on these topics in the last legislative session. We passed air toxics, we did cumulative impacts. Both of those items are undergoing rulemaking right now, and the building trades is heavily engaged in dealing with that. So, Madam Chair, in closing, we remain concerned about the high-profile examples over the past couple of years of businesses who have decided to locate outside of Minnesota, and we want that process to be reversed. In our opinion, we should be focused on recruiting new industrial development, clean energy, and manufacturing projects to our state and making it easier for companies to locate here. Madam Chair, while we often support laws that hold companies accountable, we think that on balance, this bill tilts too far toward the burdensome and will have the impact of hurting our members' jobs. We encourage the committee to make some recommended improvements to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next on my list is Amber Backus, National Waste and Recycling Association of Minnesota. She'll be followed by Jim Boyer. Welcome to the committee. When you're settled, please state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, my name is Amber Backus with United Strategies here on behalf of the National Waste Recycling Association's Minnesota chapter and the member companies that provide collection, sorting, recycling, and disposal of waste in Minnesota. We appreciate the opportunity to provide comments on the delete all to 3911 and Article 5 on packaging waste. The NWRA still has the same concerns as it did when the standalone bill was before the committee. It creates a new bureaucracy with the Producer Responsibility Organization, and that group would be in the middle of the contracts between haulers and their current municipal and residential customers. It would also allow this pro to set reimbursement rates and payment terms for the work NWRA members perform without consideration for the costs they currently bill. That being said, NWRA has made considerable progress negotiating with the bill's advocates and has come to agreement on several provisions that add transparency, protect their customer agreements, establish reliable funding mechanisms for reimbursement, and allow recycling companies to recoup their total costs, especially those associated with collecting and processing exempt materials and meeting the weekly recycling collection requirement. As House File 3911 moves forward, we hope that Chair Hansen and Representative Jordan will consider incorporating these negotiated provisions into the bill. They don't interfere with the overall environmental goals in the proposal and create certainty that Minnesota's robust recycling collection and processing system remains intact. The NWRA is also grateful that Article 5 keeps the legislature in charge of establishing recycling goals and outlines recycled content benchmarks, which drive end markets for the recycled materials NWRA members collect and process. We hope you will consider adding other legislative checkpoints as milestones in the packaging waste reduction article are met. There are some other provisions in the bill beyond the waste packaging article of concern to NWRA, but out of respect to the committee's time, I won't elaborate on them now and hope Chair Hansen and the committee members would be open to reasonable changes to keep additional costs and regulatory burdens on NWRA members to a minimum. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Next on my list is Jim Boyer, Professor Emeritus, University of Minnesota. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. Jim Boyer, as you indicated, Professor Emeritus, University of Minnesota, Department of Bioproducts and Biosystems Engineering. I just want to make a few comments about the sustainable aviation fuel question. I think it's pretty important to keep in mind that the only pathway to liquid fuels in looking at the whole suite of alternative fuel is through biomass. Biomass is the only raw material that can get you to liquid fuels. And at this point, prospects for battery-operated aircraft, there's research going on, but they're quite dim, in large part because of the fact that a battery, the weight of the fuel compared to what it delivers is a critical thing in an aircraft. It's much different than a land-based vehicle. A liquid fuel will provide 43 times as much energy as a battery of the same weight. And therefore, the aircraft industry, even though they're looking at aviation being potentially fueled by electricity in the future, the industry at large has basically come down and said that's not the way things are going to go. Biofuels that are made from biomass are basically kerosene, basically. Jet fuel is basically kerosene, but it's highly refined. And therefore, liquids that come from biomass can basically be a drop-in fuel. So as the airline industry has looked at this question, on the one hand, there's a research going on with respect to hydrogen. Huge investment, long-term, to get a fleet anywhere near the point they would operate on hydrogen. The industry is moving toward liquid fuels, and biomass is the only pathway to get there. Now, the only thing holding back biofuels today, there have been all kinds of flights from London to New York City, other trans-Pacific flights using biofuels at various combinations. The only thing holding biofuel, sustainable aviation fuel back today is cost. And there are a few technical things to be brought out in terms of yield from biomass, but the basic issue is cost versus petroleum today. And so there are a lot of questions about how does that change. But nonetheless, I believe, from my perspective, that it would be a mistake to put any kind of a barrier that would potentially make it more difficult to produce aviation fuels from biomass in Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on this bill? Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Committee members, my name is Troy Olson, and I represent the county recorders in Minnesota. So MCRA is concerned with language that prohibits county recorders from recording a deed or other instruments of conveyance unless it contains the required drain tile disclosure certificates. We're in the process of modernizing some of our processes, and this falls into that category, and we'd like to continue along with that without taking kind of a step back. We feel this might be a step back. We appreciate Representative Purcell's time that she has spent with us and other stakeholders discussing this, and we'd like to discuss it more as we go forward to make it more efficient.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to testify on this bill? Chair Hansen, do you have any comments before we go to questions from members?
I think good testimony provides some input, and I look forward to the discussion on the bill.
Great. Questions from members?
Members can feel free to contact me between adjournment today and I guess throughout the next 24 hours if you feel comfortable in connecting.
Thank you. Looks like Representative Brand had his hand up, and then we'll go to Representative Listengard.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. Chair Hansen, I got a question, but first I wanted to see if somebody from the Attorney General's office was here.
Is someone from the Attorney General's office here?
Okay.
Here's not. Representative Brand.
So there was a provision in this bill dealing with any person being allowed to provide a civil action in addition to the Attorney General, and I was just wondering if we've had substantive contact or conversation with the Attorney General's office. To me, the Attorney General is an executive function. It's one of those elected positions. And I feel like maybe this has the potential to erode some of those responsibilities and duties of the Attorney General. So I'm really kind of curious to know more about that. I just want to make sure that we're not undermining that office.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would refer to Representative Lee. This is, I think, his provision in the bill.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, we haven't had any conversation with the Attorney General's office, but I think it's important for us to consider this too. When we have a state agency that is supposed to provide and protect for the public health of our communities, and community members feel like they don't have an avenue to address some of the concerns that they are seeing in the communities. And I think that this is another process, another route for community members to be able to look at how could they make sure that our laws, current laws, are really enforced. And, this is a requirement. I think that, this process is replicating from what's already allowed under federal law. And so I think that this is not something new. This is just providing an avenue for community members to be able to make sure that the laws that we have on the books are being enforced by our state agencies.
Thank you. Representative Brand.
Yeah, another question I had on page 41, thank you, Madam Chair. Another question I had was on page 41. Right at the top, 41.3, a member appointed under paragraph A may not be a registered lobbyist. And I'm realizing this is provisions dealing with the Critical Materials Recovery Advisory Task Force. I know that some of these organizations are quite small, and, once in a while I look at, like the CFB and that sort of thing, and it seems like the executive director who is hired by a board of the organization is also listed as the lobbyist for that organization because it's so small and they don't have a lot of horsepower, manpower, you pick it. I'm just kind of curious if maybe we're at a point where maybe we're hamstringing people's abilities to represent their organizations fully.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Brand. That's a provision that I've included on multiple task forces and work, that I think it's good to have actual workers from each of the organizations rather than the lobbyists there. The lobbyist is paid to represent. I think you get a different perspective from a member, whether they're a farmer, whether they're a laborer, whether they're a volunteer. I think that provides a different flavor. We have, and the lobbyists can sit here.
Sure.
At the task force, but that perspective of someone who, and I think particularly in the critical minerals, somebody who worked with their hands, who's been in this, provides a different perspective. And you can have the testimony, and I talked about this with the advisor, you can have the testimony coming from the lobbies or from the experts or from university professors. But I think you have a stronger thing because if you've got a peer, if you go back of a peer going back and talking, hey, I was on this, and I am representing X group. I am representing the solid waste administrators. I'll just pick that one out of the list. I think that adds something that may not always be there. Does it take time away from their job? Yes, it does. But it also provides a different perspective that often is lacking in these things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Listengard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is more of a process. If we had concerns and, when is the amendments, can you kind of walk through that process? Because I'd rather, do it offline what I have concerns with.
Chair Hansen.
Madam Chair and members, so as was mentioned, we have an 8 o'clock tonight time for 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. So we have a few hours to go over that. I have already been getting amendments from folks, so I think we'll continue to try to get those ready for tomorrow. I think that there are a couple substantial pieces here that, just the timeline when we look at the calendar in front of us is if we pass the bill out tomorrow, it'll probably take a couple days for the committee report to get processed. I'm just guessing probably after we have the next floor session. So we go on break on Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday at noon. If we come on the floor on Wednesday, I'm assuming then we will be processing committee reports. It would not be in the possession of Ways and Means until after that. This particular bill will be traveling alone. It is not going to be combined in Ways and Means. It is going to be running solo in the environment, and it is going to be a Senate file. So we actually have to wait. So there are a number of steps here where I think our past practice has been you've seen flexibility on making changes as things go through the process. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I expressed some of the concerns that I have, and I just want to be able to, work through them and, improve the bill how I think it should be improved. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you. Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank our chair, Hansen, for including at least pieces of a lot of, I think, really important pieces of legislation. I, of course, am just going to focus on the few that I have championed. So thank you for keeping in the signage for ATVs across the state. There's a lot of that bill that we got feedback on, and I think there's more work to be done in the future, but I think that signage is a really crucial piece to make that the same throughout the state. Drain tile disclosure, absolutely, I continue to work very transparently with the partners on that. I just wanted to push back a little bit on the testimony of Mr. Bennett. He stated there was a strong regulatory framework for drain tile. I would love to hear about that because as far as I know, there is not. And then the definition of public waters as our state Supreme Court tasked us to do. Happy to go to bat for that. I also echo the sentiments that I would love for that public waters index to be updated by the DNR more frequently. And this is the space that we're at, just to try to make sure everyone is on the same page and has a tool to look at, see what waters are public, and to correct the mistakes that we know we need correcting. So thank you for keeping those pieces in particular in this omnibus bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. First of all, I'm really glad to hear about the pesticide-treated seed piece that you're hopefully pulling that out of the bill. Already had a fair amount of discussion last time around on the prohibiting of the planting corn on the DNR property or the state land, and I did a post on that on Facebook, and thousands of views, and constituents very upset with it. I haven't heard a single person in support of the idea of prohibiting planting corn on state land. So my question for you is, where did the request come from, and where is the support for it?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Jacob. That came from me. You know, it did not come from a lobbyist. It did not come from a group. It came from me. And looking over 20 years of testimony and discussion on this, and particularly in areas where corn requires fertilizer, this is public property, not private property. Public property owned by all of us. And that could be planted to something other than corn for a public benefit.
Representative Jacob.
So is the DNR supportive of it?
Representative Hansen.
Madam Chair and Representative Jacob, I think they are less than supportive of it, but not directly opposed to it.
Representative Jacob.
So how the program works in my area is the farmers plant the farms that the DNR owns, and they leave roughly 25% behind at the end of the year. So, and then the following spring, if there's any crop left, they can go in and harvest it at that point. So it's really a cooperative agreement. It's beneficial to the wildlife, beneficial to the DNR, beneficial to the farmers. Seems like a win-win-win. And if this goes through, it's going to be very detrimental to the farms in the area from crop depredation from deer. So I just really couldn't believe the amount of resistance or opposition to it once I made that post on Facebook. So wildly unpopular in my area.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Mr. Chair, thank you for bringing this forward. And Madam Chair, I'm just going to address some of the, correct some of the record, for the record, some of the statements that was made regarding Article 2, Section 18, the provision that I'm carrying around the air pollution compliance protocols. I think there were some discussions points saying that this is going to impact permitting, make permitting hard, not be able to attract any businesses. I think that we are aware of those conversations in the past, and if we actually look at the language of the bill, we're requiring the MPCA to look at 30 of potentially some of the most egregious facility and to take a look at how they have the potential to air toxics that impacts the environment and health. And so we're not doing anything for any new permitting, and so I just want to correct the record for that, and that we are being responsive to what we're hearing, and so that's why we're looking at the top 30 priority facilities, and we're not looking at anything that has to do with permitting going forward. The only thing that does touch permitting is if these priority facilities are identified and they either renew, amend, or modify, I think that if they're going through that process, then I think we should consider that going forward. But this does not have anything to do with recruiting new businesses to come to the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Wee. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Hansen, we're going to have, I think, a robust discussion tomorrow, and we're looking forward to that. I'm not going to go through a number of the questions that popped up as we were getting the walkthrough today, but just an observation. You've been here longer than I have. I've only been here a decade, but I don't recall a bill of this magnitude ever coming to this committee and not having one testifier throughout the entire discussion that fully supported the bill. The closest we came to that was the agencies. And while I think we can all agree there's some things here that we can appreciate, there's clearly amongst the folks here testifying who are impacted by whether it's air permits or whether it's the issue just mentioned by Representative Jacob or Representative Lizagard. There's many, many, many concerns that were mentioned today. Now, that being said, it takes a lot of work to put a bill together and to share our ideas, in the form of a bill. So that should be respected, and we, I think, can all agree that that has value. But when it comes to many of the provisions, unfortunately, I think they missed the mark. I did hear that there's a amendment coming to address the concerns of the soybean growers. That's good. But I hope that there's willingness to consider the many, many, many others that are impacted negatively, at least from their perspective. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Hansen, any closing comments on the bill, and then we'll go to you for any announcements.
I'm going to make the same comment I made in the Ag Committee with Representative Vang, that, we all represent 43,500 people, and that our perspective when we take that oath of office is we are supposed to be representing them and do what's best. And we all have different perspectives. This is a bipartisan bill. We've included, I think, more GOP bills probably than we did last year and in previous years. And so it is a comprehensive bill, and as I mentioned at the beginning, it is a supplemental bill. So we're clarifying and adding and trying to rebalance some things from last year's bill. In the 10 or the 20 years here, you never find unanimity. If you find unanimity, it's usually pretty vanilla. There is some spice in this bill, and some of us may not like it. That's the way of the world. We'll keep working on the recipe overnight here. We have the committee deadline. I think that there are members that are going to have probably amendments adjusting some of their provisions. So as this testimony starts, we take that into account, and I anticipate you will see a different bill for the final vote tomorrow. Again, that may not be enough for everybody to vote on it, but that is the way of the world. We do make the decisions based on the whole rather than the one. So I'd ask for your support, and that's kind of the timeline. Again, willing to meet with anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just as a reminder, the deadline to submit amendments to the DE electronically is to our committee administrator, Mr. Peter Strohmeyer. That is 7 p.m. Central Time this evening. Written testimony for amendments to the DE amendment will be accepted if submitted to Peter Strohmeyer by noon tomorrow. Many other announcements, Chair Hansen.
And we are looking at scheduling a meeting when we come back of the committee that will not be on these bills. We will I think Representative Liz Lagarde has a helium bill that we will be scheduling a meeting for.
With that, members, we are adjourned.